From passing away due to living in a lap of luxury, to throwing it all on the line for the country they lead, we have a wide variety of last moments and final words. On today's list, I'll be covering some of the darkest last words of presidents and leaders from around the world. In our number 10 spot, we have Spencer Percival. Spencer was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland before his assassination in 1812. At 5:15 p.m. on May 11th of that year, Spencer was on his way to an inquiry and was passing through the House of Commons when a man drew a pistol and shot Spencer in the chest. As Spencer fell to the floor, he uttered his last words, which were murder and oh my god. It's super scary that in his final moments he was realizing what had happened to him, which was obviously terrible. By the time a surgeon arrived just a few minutes later after the shooting, Spencer's pulse was already gone and he was pronounced dead. In our number 9 spot today, we have Getulio Vargas. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit that thumbs up button because it really helps us out. Vargas was the president of Brazil for a few different periods of time. From 1930 to 1934, he was interim president. In 1934, he was constitutional president until 1937, and from then until 1945, he was actually a dictator. Vargas actually ended up taking his own life in the end on August 24th, 1954. Since no one was around when he did it, his last spoken words aren't recorded, but he did leave a note behind for his son, who was the one who found him. Part of the note read as, "Nothing remains except my blood. Now I gave you my life, now I give you my death." This is honestly very eerie, and I think it really reflects the kind of mental state he was in at the time of his death. In our number 8 spot today, we have King George IV. King George IV was the King of the United Kingdom and Great Britain and Ireland from 1820 to 1830. King George hasn't necessarily been praised for being a good king or person, really, but that is not what we are here to talk about today. King George was a heavy drinker and lived an extremely indulgent lifestyle that led to some pretty extreme health conditions. Because of his poor health, in the years before his death, he was almost entirely bedridden and suffered from bouts of breathlessness. He went almost entirely blind from cataracts and had such bad gout that he couldn't even sign documents because his arm and hand were so sore. King George passed away on the morning of June 26, 1830, and while his last words have been disputed, they were somewhere along the lines of, "Oh God, I am dying, this is death." I know he wasn't a great dude, but it is still pretty sad to think of someone dying in such pain. After his death, it was discovered that he had died due to upper gastrointestinal bleeding that was caused due to a ruptured blood vessel in his stomach. But he also had a large tumor in his bladder, and his heart was enlarged with calcified valves. So all in all, he was an extremely unwell guy. In our number 7 spot, we have Albert I of Belgium. Albert I was the King of Belgium from 1909 to 1934 during quite an interesting time for the country. He really focused on his subjects and was honestly a pretty well-respected king. He passed away in 1934 after a mountaineering accident. On February 17th of that year, while climbing the side of a difficult cliff, he ended up unfortunately falling to his death. He was 58 years old at the time, and speculations began to swirl about what exactly happened since he was alone at the time of his passing. Since he was alone, his exact last words are likely unknown, but these are some of the last words he spoke to the last person he saw before the accident. "If I feel in good form, I shall take the difficult way up. If I do not, I shall take the easy one. I shall join you in an hour." While this sentence is fairly normal, it's pretty dark knowing what we know now. He really had no idea how close he was to his death. In our number 6 spot today, we have James Monroe. James was the 5th President of the United States from March of 1817 to March of 1825. While James isn't regarded as a necessarily bad president, he did have slaves and owned a pretty large plantation, so I'm gonna go ahead and just deem him as not that great of a guy. He ended up passing away at the age of 73 on July 4th, 1831, of heart failure and tuberculosis. His last words were, "I regret that I should leave this world without beholding him again." The him he was talking about was his best friend's James Madison. This is kind of cute, but also very sad. The pair had actually had a falling out after many years of friendship, which really just adds a little insult to injury on that one. In our number 5 spot today, we have Francisco Solano Lopez. Francisco Solano Lopez was the second president of Paraguay from 1862 until he passed away on March 1st, 1870. He was a really controversial president as people blamed him for the outbreak of the Paraguayan War. He actually ended up dying in another war. He was offered his life if he surrendered, but he refused and still tried to fight back. His final words were, "I die for my homeland." He really ended up making the greatest sacrifice he could. It's just really sad that things had to end that way. In our number 4 spot today, we have Lal Bahadur Shastri. Lal was the second Prime Minister of India from June of 1964 until January of 1966. He was a leader who really tried his best not to mix religion with politics, and honestly lived his life trying to be a servant to the public as best as possible. He ended up passing away just one day after signing the treaty to end the Indo-Pakistan War. While it was released that he died from cardiac arrest, people have since speculated that it was a cover-up and that foul play was actually involved. His final words were, "O Father, O Rama." Rama is a deity in Hinduism and is the 7th avatar of the god Vishnu. Assuming that he really did die from cardiac arrest, I just really hope he wasn't calling out for the name of his gods because he was in pain. In our number 3 spot, we have George V. George V was the King of the United Kingdom from 1910 to 1936 when he passed away. He wasn't originally supposed to be king, but in 1892 his older brother ended up passing away unexpectedly, which put him in line for the throne just after his father. He ended up taking over the role once his father had passed. For the last few years of his life, he ended up falling quite ill, and after his favorite sister passed away, he fell into a deep depression, which definitely didn't help his health at all. His last words were, "God damn you," which he said to his nurse as she injected him with a sedative. This is dark because his doctor actually admitted to giving him drugs that would speed up his dying process. He was certainly already on his deathbed, but it's pretty freaky that he was basically forced into dying sooner. And I feel like he knew what was going on considering his rude language to his nurse. I don't know about you guys, but this one feels pretty suspicious. In our number 2 spot today, we have Harold Holt. Harold was the 17th Prime Minister of Australia until his death in 1967. In December of that year, Harold was with 4 other people when he convinced everyone to stop at Cheviot Beach for a swim. The weather conditions were pretty rough, so only one other person actually went into the water with him. Harold ended up going too far out and got caught in the rip, which pulled him completely out of sight. This was actually the last time anybody has ever seen him because his body has never been found. His last words were, "I know this beach like the back of my hand." It's super sad to know that he really had no idea the danger that he was just about to put himself in. In our number 1 spot today, we have Samuel Doe. Samuel was the 21st president of Liberia from 1986 until 1990. Samuel was a master sergeant who actually led a military coup in April of 1980, which killed the then president, William R. Tolbert Jr. He ended up being quite a corrupt and totalitarian president and only got more and more repressive as time went on. In 1989, a civil war started in Liberia when rebels entered. In September of 1990, Samuel was captured by the rebels as well as a former ally of his, Charles Taylor. In order to prove that Samuel was not protected by black magic, they started by cutting his ears off first. There are some pretty gruesome details that happen after, as he was tortured for 12 hours, which was recorded before they eventually killed him. The last words that Samuel spoke were those that one of his captors told him to say, were that the government is overthrown. I am therefore asking the armed forces to surrender to Field Marshal Prince Johnson. Prince Johnson being the one behind this coup. I honestly just can't think of a worse way to go, so this story really freaks me out. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thank you so much for checking it out. If there's any presidents that you feel like I missed, please comment them down below because I would love to know a few more of these stories. I've been your host, Olivia Kozlowski, and I'll see you next time. Okay, I think I know how to say that. Ooh, Getulio. Yep, that's what we're gonna go with. Vargas was the president of Brazil for a few different periods of time. I'm gonna do that again because that was yikes. And then I don't know why I have all this. If 5 is not what B is, that would be